Miraculous food from 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 16. God had given his people a very important command: worship him, the only true God. But now, in the time of King Ahab, the Israelites were worshiping false gods. They had forgotten all about following God's command and even had built altars to other gods. Because of their disobedience, God sent a message through Elijah that there would be no rain in Israel until God caused it to fall. This meant there would be no water to keep the rivers and lakes full. The ground would dry up so that food would not grow. During this time, God took care of Elijah. God told Elijah to go to the Kerith ravine, or the brook Kerith, a place where he drank water from a brook, and birds brought him food. But 1 Kings 17 verse 7 tells us, "And it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land." Each day Elijah watched the brook get smaller and smaller and smaller, until finally one day there was nothing left but mud. Elijah couldn't even get one little drink. Elijah knew he couldn't live very long without water. But God didn't forget Elijah. God knew just what Elijah needed and had a plan to continue taking care of him. 1 Kings 17 verse 9 tells us what God told Elijah to do. The Bible says, "Arise, get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee." Do you see Zarephath on the map? Oh, look where Elijah was. He was at the Kerith brook. He had to go all the way up to Zarephath. So God told him to go to Zarephath, and he had commanded a widow woman there to sustain him. Even though Elijah knew that most widows were very poor, and especially during this time would not have extra food to give to strangers, Elijah did what he always did when God spoke to him. Elijah went where God told him to go. Elijah trusted God even though he had to go a long way to get food and water. When Elijah came to Zarephath, he saw a woman gathering sticks by the town gate. Could this woman be the widow God had told him about? "Excuse me, I'm very thirsty," Elijah told the woman. "Would you please bring me a drink of water?" "Of course," the woman answered. "I'll be right back with some water for you." Surely she must be the widow he was looking for. "Wait," he called. "Would you please bring me a piece of bread when you come back? I'm hungry too." What do you think most people at this time would say if someone asked them for food? And the woman answered, "As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I'm gathering 2 sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." How could this poor woman help Elijah when she didn't even have enough food for herself and her son? And Elijah said, "Fear not, go and do as you have said, but make me a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for you and your son." We read in 1 Kings 17 verse 14 why Elijah was so sure about what he told the woman. "For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail, until the day that the Lord sendeth rain upon the earth." What astounding news! And hard to believe, too! What do you think the woman did next? What would you have done? The woman went home and did as Elijah had told her. First, she got out the flour and oil and baked 1 cake of bread. This bread was for Elijah. Then she stirred a little more flour and poured a little more oil to bake another cake of bread. The second bread was for her son. She was probably afraid to look in the flour jar for the third time. She was very hungry and would have to make her own cake of bread out of whatever was left. What if there was no more flour? She may have thought, her heart pounding. The woman looked in the flour jar. There was enough flour to make another cake of bread, and when she tipped the oil jar, there was just enough oil to mix the dough. What was even more amazing was that every day until God sent rain again, there was enough oil and flour to make bread for all three of them. God showed his great power and love by supplying food for Elijah, the woman, and her son, even when there was no rain. Only God could do a miracle as great as this. And here's our verse today, Psalm 77, verse 14. Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Let's say it together. Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Psalm 77, verse 14. Only God can help us with situations that seem impossible, like getting along with someone who dislikes us, or stopping arguments with a brother or sister. Because God's power never fails, we can depend on his care and help in all situations. We use power strips to make sure in a power surge or outage, our electronics don't get damaged. We trust it to protect our things, but sometimes even power strips fail. But God's power never fails. He will always help us. And here's our big idea. We can depend on God because his power never fails. Let's say that together. We can depend on God because his power never fails. Let's think about our lesson today. When the brook Elijah drank from dried up, God directed him to find a widow who would supply him with food. When Elijah and the widow and her son were hungry, God provided food and drink for them. He made sure that their physical hunger was satisfied with bread. Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger. By sending Jesus, God provided a way for our spiritual hunger, our wanting to know God and live with him forever, to be satisfied. So remember our big idea. We can depend on God because his power never fails. And remember our verse today. Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. And God will do wonders. He will help us. His power will never fail. So when we have a need, or even when it's a hard time, like Elijah went through, God will help us. We just need to pray and trust him and follow what he asks us to do or where he wants us to go.
A long time ago, there was a drought in the land of Israel. This means that for a very long time there was no rain and all of the land was dry. During this time, there was a man named Elijah. Elijah was a prophet, so he spent his time traveling the land helping people and speaking on behalf of God. During this drought, God had instructed Elijah to camp out beside a small brook called Cherith. There, God provided food for Elijah brought to him by ravens and water courtesy of the brook. But after a while, the brook dried up. So God told Elijah to get up and go to a town called Zarephath. Once he got there, there would be a widow woman that God commanded to feed Elijah. Hearing this good news, Elijah set off towards Zarephath. When he arrived, he went out and found the woman that God had told him about. She was out by the city gates gathering sticks. Elijah called out to the woman and asked her to bring him some water. She was happy to help the prophet, but as she started to walk away, Elijah had a second request. He said, "Bring me a small loaf of bread as well." This may seem like a simple request. After all, it was only one piece of bread that Elijah was asking for, but to this woman, it was so much more. She called back to Elijah saying, "I don't have any bread. All I have is a handful of flour and a little bit of oil, and I was going to use what I had left to make one final meal for me and my son before we die." Elijah looked back at the woman and insisted that she use her flour and oil to make him a piece of bread anyway. And after that, she could make her small family a meal. He went on to tell her what the Lord had said. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day that the Lord sends rain on the land. The woman left and made the bread for Elijah, and when she had finished, she realized that what God had promised came true. There was still some flour and oil left. So she made a meal for her and her son to eat, and every time she went back to make bread during the drought, she always had enough. God did as he promised and multiplied her flour and oil until the day came when rain returned to the land. The end.
How many of you have ever gone to make a bowl of cereal and the box of cereal is nearly empty? Like there are just a few actual pieces of cereal left and then there's just the crumbs. Yeah, that's always pretty disappointing. And then you go to the fridge only to realize there's barely enough milk left for your bowl. Oh, that is the worst. This is kind of what it was like for the boy in our story. His mom was getting ready to make them one last meal. They only had a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil to make some bread. It was kind of like they only had a little bit of cereal left and a little bit of milk for it. Now, how would you feel if you were the kid in our story? Not only was there not much left, but it was the last meal in the kitchen. His mom went to go prepare that meal, and when she came back, she tells him that she is going to give the meal away to someone else who needed it. How would you feel in that moment? What would you say to your parent? Honestly, I would be confused. I'd probably even be afraid. I'd say something like, but now there isn't enough for us. What are we gonna eat? Where are we gonna get food? His mom in the story didn't know the answer to those questions, but she trusted that God did have the answers. She trusted that God was gonna provide for her and for her son, and so she decided to give the food to Elijah. Just like Elijah told the widow, God did not let them run out of food. Their flour and oil did not run out. God gave them what they needed to survive. It would kind of be like giving away that last bowl of cereal and then going back to the pantry and there's more cereal in the box. And then you go to the fridge and somehow there's just more milk in the jug. You see, the widow and her son in the story didn't know where more food was going to come from, but they trusted that God would provide for them. Now, we don't always know how God is going to provide for us, and that's okay. We can still trust in Him every single day to provide for what we need. Sometimes God will provide for you in ways that aren't so obvious. Or think about this. God provided for the widow by telling her to give. Still, she trusted that when she gave, God would give back to her and provide for her. God always provides for us. His ways are higher than our ways. We can trust in God because He is good and He provides for our needs. Everyone say this after me. Every day, I can trust in Jesus.
Elijah the prophet spoke to Ahab, the evil king of Israel, and gave him a message. There will be no dew or rain for the next few years unless I command it. This will certainly happen.
Oh no!
Then God told Elijah to go to a place near a stream. God said the ravens would provide food for Elijah to eat, so Elijah obeyed God. The ravens brought him bread and meat, and he drank water from the stream. After a while, the stream dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then God told Elijah to go to a small village. God said a widow in the town would provide for Elijah, so Elijah obeyed God. When Elijah got to the gate of the city, he saw a widow gathering wood. He called to her, "Please bring me a little water so I can drink." As she went to get it, he added, "Please bring me a piece of bread too." But the women told Elijah, "I don't have bread. I only have a little bit of flour and oil." The woman and her son were planning to eat one more meal before they died from hunger. "Don't be afraid," Elijah said. "Go and prepare the meal, but first bring me a small loaf of bread. Then make some for yourself and your son. God says you will not run out of flour or oil until rain comes again." So the woman prepared the meal. She, Elijah, and everyone in her household had enough to eat, and she did not run out of flour or oil, just like the Lord had said. Sometime later, the woman's son got sick, and he stopped breathing. Elijah took the boy upstairs and laid him on the bed. He cried out to God, stretched himself out over the boy 3 times, and cried out to God again. "Lord my God, please let this boy live again," Elijah prayed. The Lord listened to Elijah, and the boy's life came into him again. He was alive. Elijah led the boy to his mother. She said to Elijah, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the Lord really does speak through you." God miraculously provided through Elijah to give food to the widow and life to the widow's son. Many years later, God miraculously provided through his own son, Jesus. Jesus is greater than Elijah. In Jesus, God provides salvation and life to everyone who trusts in him.